for GPA, I've tried to make it so that I can equally evaluate students who are both from a school that gives you a GPA and then from schools that have pass-fail programs. So to do that, I used to like rate the GPA where you would get like 3 points if you had a 3.5 to a 4.0 and 2 points if you had a 3 to 3.5. What I've done now is taken that grading system completely out. And what I look at is red flags. So I have part of my application review that is the red flag part. So what I'm looking for is like, if you have a GPA like less than a 2.8, you get a red flag. Then with that caveat, so for pass-fail programs, if you have a fail, that would be a red flag.
Well, just to give you a broad kind of definition of how we approach looking at students. So we have like an Excel sheet that looks at many different things. And so it's weighted not super heavily. So I would say we probably look at, I think it's like 10-ish things, and it's like one of the 10 things, and it's not weighted any more heavily than anything else necessarily.
Okay.
And so I think that my general rule of thumb is, I am not looking for somebody with a 4.0, but I'm also looking for somebody that probably has at least a 3.0, 3.2,
Sure.
So I think as long as you're above 3, you're probably fine. We have like we essentially have breakpoints. Like if you're between 3.75 and 4, you get 5 points. If you're between 3.5 and 3.75, you get 4 points. So if that gives you just a little bit of an idea of how we play into it. So I don't think it really hurts somebody unless they have, a sub 3.
Okay.
Which, obviously it doesn't account for everything. But there has to be at least something to do in the screening process. I think it's a small part, but I don't put a lot of weight in it at all. To be honest with you, it's not one of the most important things to me.
Well, GPA, over the last more recent years, it's not really that big of it's not helpful because every school has a different GPA scale.
Okay.
So we use it, but it's not important, it's as significant as it used to be.
Honestly, it depends on the resident's GPA. If it's very low, which I consider less than 3, that to me is more of a red flag, but the difference between having a 3.4 and a 3.6 or whatever, that it's kind of the same to me.
So I will say that in the first round of applications where we are solely looking at the written, what's come to us through forecasts, we do take a look at the student's transcript, and we specifically look at therapeutics courses, as well as overall GPA. And so I would say it's about, if I had to guess, maybe a quarter of the rubric is associated with GPA. However, we do take into consideration every other aspect of the application as well. So we have had some really great candidates that don't have perfect GPAs, but we also have had candidates that have a 4.0 GPA and they're not a good fit for us. So we do keep it into consideration, but I wouldn't say that there's a hard cutoff or it's a number that we're specifically looking for.
So that's kind of tricky because all schools aren't equal as far as electives, right? So sure. I went to University of Kansas, and they've changed since, but when I went, we had 0 electives. I had no control over any of that. And then there are schools like your school who has like all sorts of really cool electives. You have their certificate programs. You could get your MBA. So having been an RPD for a while, I know which schools offer those. So I look to see if you had the chance, did you take those?
Okay.
I try not to fault people who were never given those chances.
Sure.
I also know that people can't control their APPE schedule, and a lot of times they can't control what their APPE experiences are, but you can control if you picked all community electives versus trying to get some of the elective rotations that are more geared towards a hospital residency. So that's another thing that I'm looking for, is like, what did you pick for those experiences that you had control over?
So I think that one thing I like to take into account is thinking about how a lot of the students don't have control over the ability to have certain classes and certain types of rotation. So I'm probably a little bit different in terms of who you're interviewing, being from a specialty residency, since I do pediatrics. So it's a little different. My answers might be a little bit different because of that.
Sure.
So it's always hard for the people applying for our program if they can't get as many pediatric rotations as they want, or pediatric elective, because that's something that they can't control.
Mm-hmm.
So I try not to hold, like, from my perspective, from being in pediatrics, against somebody knowing that they can't control if there's an elective or not at their school, or if how many they're allowed to do, or how many sites there are at the school that they have. Obviously at SIUE, you're very fortunate having a track, so that's always an advantage, but I try not to put too much weight into that, because I know that's not controllable at all schools of pharmacy. But what I look more at is just how many clinical rotations you have. It doesn't have to be in a certain area, but definitely ones where I see that you're on rounds and you're interacting with the medical team and doing like an intense review of patient charts, because that's going to be similar to what your experience would be like at our residency program. So to me, it's always nice for us if you have multiple pediatric rotations. It's just not the norm, but having a good internal medicine rotation or a good critical care rotation in an adult institution, the experience is just as good. So I think that I look more at like the actual clinical rotations. I'll just tell you from my experience. I've been doing this for many years, even working not as an RPD, but behind the scenes. There's a lot of pharmacy schools that don't require a certain number, and somebody may have one clinical rotation, which to me is more surprising than some places that have 3 or 4 clinical rotations. So that would be more of concerning to me, not having a lot of clinical rotations versus what type they are, where they are, or exactly what what area that they're in.
Again, it varies from college to college. To answer your specific question, we do look at rotations to see what kind of rotation they have. Now, a lot of this is out of the control of the applicant or the student, because it's just like a randomization. It's by luck that they have a good rotation or not.
Okay.
So we do look at it, but we don't put a lot of weight on it.
For that one, more of their APPE rotations. I look to see kind of what the balance is as far as inpatient or clinical rotations versus other types of rotations. And then I also look to see in their letter of intent, if they identify a certain area as an interest, have they actually had an experience in that area? So I've had before where some candidates have talked about their love of ICU, but in their rotations, they've never had an ICU rotation. So that to me makes me wonder if you really have good self-assessment or anything like that.
In terms of courses, we are a community-based residency program. So if the transcript does provide a little bit of description of each of the therapeutics courses, whether it's OTC topics or self-care, that would definitely be something that I would look at, because it would be a little bit more important for me to look at those types of courses compared to like critical care, for example. And so I would take a look at courses that are more geared towards outpatient community-based practice.
Okay.
But in terms of APPE rotations, I will mostly I'll look for patient-specific or patient-heavy APPE rotations. So I'm looking for at least 3 or 4 rotations that have been completed so far successfully that have a direct patient care aspect. So although it is good to get some management experience, or if you have a rotation at a corporate office, that's good experience, but it's not something that I weigh on heavily in terms of APPE experience.